these gentlemen are actually all known to me personally. Steve more like really in person, but they're known to me in person because I'm really familiar with their work, their written work. And so, I mean, as it turns out, I've reviewed one of Steve Bass's books as well as Lucian Steil. And right now I'm reading Professor Adams' book that he'll be considering, and I'm hoping to have a review for that shortly. So I am very much looking forward to hearing from these gentlemen. I don't want to take any more away from their time. And so please, Mr. Bass, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. And so I'm going to just briefly introduce the players here. I'm Steve Bass. I'm going to do this. So we're going to do this in the sort of reverse order from the way the previous session was done. And I'm going to be going in order of what might be called name recognition. So since I'm the least known, I'm going to go up first. And then we're going to have Lucian Steil, and then we're going to have Robert Adam, who is obviously the best known and has the widest name recognition of all of us. So for myself, I've been an architect in practice since 1974. I have a bachelor's degree from Pratt Institute in New York City and a master's of art from the Royal College of Art in London, where I studied under the direction of Dr. Keith Critchlow and was a participant in the initial Prince of Wales summer course in architecture, which Leon Creer referred to actually in his opening talk, which was quite charming when we were at Banyai. Anyway, I'm currently a fellow with the Institute of Classical Architecture and Art in New York, where I teach on the theme of proportion in geometry and design. I've also had the privilege of teaching at Notre Dame University for a couple of years at the Grand Central Academy of Art here in New York and the New York Open Center. And my book, Beauty, Memory, Unity, is now available through Lindisfarne Books and other sources. Lucian Steil is an author, educator, and architect. He believes that traditional cities and architecture have always been the ideals of harmony and beauty in a destabilized and disrupted world. For him, they have remained desirable models of cultural identity, home, urbanity, and civilization. He maintains that the traditional city remains a good and desirable place to live, and that tradition is a good home for modernity and originality. Rather than becoming obsolete, the traditional city has maintained its actuality in the context of global warming and climate change, both its morphology and typological components, as well as its socioeconomic and convivial patterns and paradigms, seem the ones best adopted to refresh and adjust to the dramatic challenges of a post-pandemic urban civilization and a new ecology of sits slow and glocalism, which is a charming term. Lucian Steil maintains that contemporary traditional architects and urbanists counterbalance an opportunistic architectural and planning establishment that clings nostalgically to past paradigms of capitalism and modernism. For him, they are poets, idealists, craftsmen, and artists who invent, design, and build places and buildings of durable quality in a perspective of firmitas, utilitas, and venustas, and allowing people of our time to live in comfort, security, harmony, enlightenment, and pleasure. And lastly, we have Robert Adam. And let me just get this a little bit open here. Robert Adam was trained at the University of Westminster, and in 1973 won a Rome Scholarship. He has practiced in the city of Winchester since 1977 and founded Robert Adam Architects in 2000. He now practices as Robert Adam Architectural Consultants. Projects include major private houses, conservation, and public and commercial buildings. He has 30 years experience in master planning and has pioneered objective coding. Robert is well known as a major figure in the development of traditional and classical architecture, as a pioneer of contextual urban design, a designer of furniture, and author and scholar. His work is widely published, broadcast, and exhibited. He lectures widely in the UK and abroad, and has undertaken lecture tours of the USA, Russia, China, Iran, and Brazil. He has written numerous historical, critical, and theoretical papers. His books include Classical Architecture, a Complete Handbook, The Seven Sins of Architecture, Heritage and Culture, The Globalization of Modern Architecture, and his recent book, Time for Architecture. Robert founded the International Network for Traditional Building, Architecture, and Urbanism, INTERBAU, in 2001, and the Traditional Architecture Group in 2003. Many awards, including the ICAA Arthur Ross Award in 2005 and the Richard Dreyhaus Prize in 2017. So that's our cast, our very distinguished cast. These two other fellows here are quite distinguished. And I have met both of them before and hold them in very high regard. I'm going to start off being the least known of these. And let's see if I can now, here we go. We can do this. Oh, share. I always hit the wrong little buttons here. I'm also terrible. We need to share. Why can't I see this? Sorry. This technical stuff is just crazy. I can't see my, I'll put these things away because I've read them. Oh, come on. Put this thing away. I'm desperately trying to find my presentation here. Oh boy. Oh, here it is. It's off on the side. No wonder I couldn't find it. All right. So now we need slideshow, which is up here. All right, finally. All right, we have it. I'm going to be discussing my recently published book called Beauty, Memory, Unity, which is a theory of the use of proportion in classical architecture that developed out of my work over the years at the ICAA, and also from my work with Dr. Keith Critchlow. And let's see if we, how do we, yeah, we can advance. Okay, so proportion is the use of number and geometry as tools for design. And here we see number and we see geometry. This is from Vitruvius. This is his 4-column temple, 4-column portico. And he uses an arithmetic construction here. And what I've done over here in the course of my research is to put a geometrical overlay onto it and to show that these seemingly arbitrary arithmetic of Vitruvius actually has a geometrical bearing. And we see this is the golden section point of the width of the temple, and it guides the placement of the column. If we can continue to divide by 5 by the golden section, and we can actually get to the column diameter, and we can get to the entablature through another kind of manipulation. But in the arts, number and geometry are approached in a kind of a qualitative or symbolic mode. They're not approached in the mathematical mode. The reason is that the number is that the proportions, the numbers in the geometry, are used to generate a harmony between the parts and between the parts in the whole. And then it's not, you're not using numbers to get the right answer. There is no right answer in the arts. You're trying to generate a harmony that gives a unified sense of the work. And this was called eurythmy by Vitruvius, and it's called consonances by Alberti. But this idea of having harmonic relations within the work really only makes sense if we're living in a kind of harmonically oriented universe. And this is the universe of Plato. And this was what I was shown by Critchlow, how to, he took me through some of these works, and I was able to ascertain how these ideas come together. Here we see a diagram of what's referred to as the Platonic Psyche. It's this harmonic world, a harmonic universe. And it has a containment, and it has a part that is idea, represents idea without matter, and it has a part that represents matter without idea. And the individual psyche, the individual mind or consciousness, unites those two things in this Platonic system, and thus creates the orderly cosmos that we experience. And anything that lives in that world comes into being in a series of 4 steps or 4 stages. It starts in unity as a point source, and then expands into some containment. It divides from within itself by some pattern, and then is structured. The original dyadic pattern is unstable. It's this is the Tai Chi, if you recognize it here, and but it needs stabilization as a structure. And this is the diagram that we were looking at in the last slide. But there's still one step further that needs to be achieved, and that's the full manifestation in the symbol of the square. So you have a development from unity through division, structure, and manifestation. And this can also be a design theory. You can start with a model of unity. You can subdivide it by some key method, and then develop elements of structure and ornamentation using those that pattern of division. It also gives the key to the 4 subjects that are known as the quadrivium: arithmetic, which is number in concept; geometry, number in space; harmony, the basis of music, number in time; and astronomy, number in space and time. There are also anything that has gone through that process will also be participating in a kind of cosmological cycle that's generally known as the proceeding, maintaining, and returning. Plato calls it the good, the true, and the beautiful. Every spiritual tradition has some sequence of names for these 3 phases. I've had the temerity here to introduce the idea of the 3 principal orders in architecture as representing these states of the cycle. So if we think about the temple at the Temple of Apollo at Bassae, for example, the outer aspect of it is done in the Doric order, and this is a way you proceed to begin your spiritual journey, and you go through a kind of purification, a physical purification. As you get into the work, the wisdom tradition and the mystery tradition unfolds for you in the sign of the Ionic. As you proceed through the building, you go down a row of Ionic columns, and at the back of the cello, where the statue of Apollo would normally be, there is the single Corinthian column, which is the first, I believe, the first known use of all 3 of these orders together in a single building. And so these 3 elements represent can I think represent these states of the cycle. So this is a kind of a Platonic worldview, but the goal of working in any classical art form, as far as I'm concerned at least, is the achievement of the possibility of the experience of the beautiful. And I use the definition of Plotinus that beauty is a joyous state of the soul or the mind or the consciousness as it recalls its relationship to unity, to some ultimate state of unity. And again, by harmonizing the elements of the building, you allow for this possibility of the experience of beauty and this joyous state, this elevated state of the soul, as we remember that we're part of a harmonic universe. Now, in this way of looking at it, beauty is not in the thing, in the object, or in the measures of the object. It's in you. It's in the state of the soul. It's the state of the soul, the state of the psyche, the mind, and it's in you. It can't be given away or forced on anyone. It has to be experienced, and it has to be experienced voluntarily or spontaneously. However, it will only be experienced depending on the soul's preparation, on the individual's preparation. And this gives us the sort of modernist notion that beauty is subjective, because we're all prepared differently. And so we see these things differently. But in fact, there is an objective definition, which I'm citing here. But we experience these things differently. And the experience of beauty produces eros, or desire, to join with the object of beauty. This gives the designer a power to compel people's attention and to have people desire what they produce, and effectively to love what they produce. The artisan or the artist is married to beauty, and I love these images. I could do a long talk on these images, but here is the artisan in the form of Hephaestus, and here is beauty in the form of Aphrodite, and they are actually married in their mythic cycle. But it's a terrible marriage because she gives herself to everyone, and he can't control her. He can't have her in effect for himself, and he gets very frustrated, and he tries to control her, which we see here. But he only demeans himself. So in the end, the artist is married to beauty. We're bound to seek beauty, but it doesn't belong to anyone. Beauty belongs to everybody. It's a possibility everyone can participate in. And according to Alberti, that search for the beautiful will take everything we have and more, and even then it's only rarely achieved. So we shouldn't get frustrated like poor Hephaestus here, trying to throw a net over beauty to control her. In the work itself, in trying to apply these proportional ideas, there are 2 kinds of ratios. There are rational ratios made out of whole numbers, and here I'm showing that they're related to the what might be called the Pythagorean octave, and these represent the lengths of strings that you would need to create the harmonic notes in the octave: the fundamental, the octave, the fifth, and the fourth. And we can see that they're guided here by a geometry of the diagonal and the semi-diagonal, and where those lines intersect in various ways, we get the positions of these notes. And I've used that same geometrical network here in this exercise to both create the portico and to create the element of the portico using the same geometrical pattern. And it's both a musical analogy and an illustration of that sense of unity being achieved through similar geometrical patterns, or structuring the part and the whole through similar geometrical patterns. And there also are a series of ratios that are not based on numbers, but they're based on relationships of geometrical objects. And we can see them here. The fundamental one, of course, is this phenomenon known as the golden section, or phi, symbolized by the Greek letter phi. Phi symbolically returns us to unity through multiplicity. I don't argue that this rectangle here, the golden rectangle, is any more beautiful than any other rectangles, because the beauty is not in the rectangle. As Plotinus has told us, the beauty is in us. It's in our experience of recognizing that we live in a harmonic universe. So for myself, I tend to subdivide unity. I tend to start with a square and subdivide it, and let this be the key subdivision. And then we can continue that pattern of division to get harmonically related intervals, which we can use to structure the elements of the design, structure and place the elements of the design. Phi has an even deeper meaning in a certain sense, and this way we're getting into some sort of rather deep Neoplatonic waters, but Phi represents, Phi governs the squaring of the circle, and it represents this idea of the hieros gamos, or the sacred marriage of matter and spirit, which is what the human being is said to be in the Hermetic literature. You are the marriage of matter and spirit. That even goes back to ancient Egypt, I think, too. But you're the child of earth and starry sky. You're supposed to say to one of the divinities in the Book of the Dead. I'm not sure where that occurs, but anyway, the golden section squares the circle, and it governs the physical structure of the human being. And the human being is thus a marriage of matter and spirit, and embodies those harmonies. And this is why we resonate with classical architecture, as we do with the elements of classical architecture. But the modern world has exiled the sorcerer. And the world is now run by the sorcerer's apprentice. And the sorcerer's apprentice is very dangerous, because they can turn the powers of nature on, but they can't turn them off, because they don't understand the power of limits. They don't recognize the limit. And this gives us the character of the world that we have today. So ultimately, what we have to do is try to escape in the creation of a new contemporary architecture. We have to try to escape from the alienation, the anxiety, the terror, the intentional ugliness, which we've heard described in some of the previous talks. For me, there could be many pathways, and we all have to work on this. For myself, I had the good fortune to encounter Keith Critchlow, who took me down this Platonic pathway and showed me how you can voluntarily assume the ancient harmonic viewpoint without denying the modern mechanistic viewpoint. They are not contradictory, in spite of what some people in our country here may think. They're not contradictory at all. We could also go to somebody like Goethe. And Goethe is an important figure because he was the last non-reductionist scientist. And his non-reductionism points a way towards a possible integration of art and science. That's a new phenomenon. And it's very difficult. I've tried to penetrate Goethe. Like Plato, you need a teacher. And I haven't really found one for Goethe, but I'm trying to look. I also did have the good fortune, just in my own personal life, to run into this man here, Michael Harner. And he was a teacher of shamanic journeying technique. Now, I understand this is not for everybody. This is serious stuff, where he takes you on a journey of consciousness where you encounter spiritual beings, and you actually encounter them. And I've been on these journeys guided by him and actually encountered these beings. And one of the things I realized was that a designer could treat the elements of architecture as though they were spirit helpers. So you think of that Doric capital, for example, where does that live? Where is that Doric capital in the universe, right? It's not a physical object. It's an idea. It has a kind of spiritual or even metaphysical presence. And so we can treat them as spirit helpers, just the way the shaman would treat the bear spirit or the eagle spirit or whatever it is. But whatever path we travel, in order to create a vital new architecture, the world is going to have to be re-enchanted. The sorcerer is going to have to return. We're going to have to find him and bring him back, basically, bring him out of exile. And we have to confront the idea that what we're doing is nothing short of the magical animation of matter. If we want a living architecture, it is going to, like ourselves, it's going to be a marriage of matter and spirit, and it's going to involve us as the guides to magical animation. And I was very interested in, or have been very interested in Louis Sullivan in this regard, actually. He's generally taken as a martyr for modernism, but in fact, he really isn't. I don't think he is at all. And in the last year of his life, he writes an incredible book called A System of Architectural Ornament According with the Philosophy of Man's Powers. Well, what are man's powers? Their power to magically animate matter. And he shows us how to do that in this book in 19 plates. I won't go into the number 19, but it's a significant number. And he says that the old world used to be governed by magic. And you're expecting him then to throw over the magic. But then he says, here a new faith is advanced, that the human beings with their natural powers developed and free, and I think he's referring to the United States here, may control their destiny. And this was the goal of the ancient mysteries, was to control your destiny or transcend fate through the finer magic of an enlarged vision. So he's far from throwing over the magic. He's going to show us how to reinvigorate the magic. And I always think of this photograph because this is the enlarged contemporary vision. And if we're going to create a vital new architecture that really comes to life the way this statue did in Pygmalion, we're going to need this viewpoint. We're going to have to take this viewpoint in some way, shape, or form. And this, of course, this photograph was taken by an American with his natural powers developed and free and flying to the moon. Well, in the end, Sullivan admonishes us to remember the seed germ, remember the beginning, remember that point source from which we started, that sense of unity that we need. And he tells us that we're all artists whose destiny it is to create a fit abiding place, a sane and beautiful world. So let's get to work. And I hope that my book will help designers on that pathway towards a new architecture. So thank you. And that's my show. And I'm going to end it there. And I'm going to give it to Lucian Steil.
Okay.
Go ahead, please, Lucian.
Yeah, let me try to get, okay. Oh my God. Yeah, I have to get, okay, I have to get my slideshow also. Share screen. Oh, okay, I get it. All right, share. Okay, all right. Okay, I can't really. Oh, okay, all right. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, you see my slide?
Yes.
Okay, so my presentation addresses and illustrates topics from my book, In the Mood for Architecture, Tradition, Modernism, and Serendipity. In the context of this rather broad and sweeping view on traditional architecture and urbanism, I elaborate on imitation and originality, newness and evolution, genius loci and zeitgeist, and offer some thoughts and images on how we may better build, reconstruct, inhabit, and dwell poetically on these fragile planets. In the Mood for Architecture is a meditation on tradition in a contemporary context, not a theory and not a manifesto. It is about rethinking and reassessing concepts at the foundation of my work. And like a meditation, it is not a finished process, but an ongoing ritual which needs to be repeated regularly in the context of any cultural or intellectual endeavor to avoid stagnation or laziness of both thinking and professional engagement. In the perspective of tradition, considered not as a static being, but as a perpetual becoming. And the following quote by Paul Bowles nails it in an uncompromising manner. In the school, they teach you what the world means. And once you have learned, you will always know, Amar's father had told him. But suppose the world changes, Amar had thought, then what would you know? Now let me elaborate more on the main concepts in my book title, Tradition, Modernism, and Serendipity, By the way, being in the mood for architecture is not a one-way desire or craving for somebody or something, but a kind of mutual attraction and gravitation, an open lovingness and empathy between two entities. Like, I'm in the mood for architecture, which is in the mood for me. Our tradition is not a static repertoire of timelessly valid solutions, patterns, and methods. It is a selective, inventive, and evolutionary process of reconstruction, recreation, and adaptation. Rather than subordinating to cultural stagnation and absurd customs, tradition fosters indeed a perpetually organic modernity in what Johann Wolfgang von Goethe calls an eternal newness, tending towards a new excellence. Modernism instead has imposed compulsive change rather than adaptation and evolution as the principal motto of culture, economy, and society. It has paradoxically achieved a permanence of impermanence, resulting in a perpetual state of deconstruction and obsolescence. The future we have been promised by modernism has never been what it was supposed to be. A perpetual experiment, it has become outdated and antiquated as soon as it appeared. Here's some delightful quotes which pointedly comment on the future. They highlight strikingly the paradoxes between ideologies of time and place, as well as ideologies of human action and inaction. The future is inevitable and precise, but it may not occur. By Jorge Luis Borges, and another quote by Paul Bowles: one of these days, the future will be here and you won't be ready for it. Now, how true this sounds in our surprising present, stricken in the drama of our pandemic, climate change, and the unprecedented erosion of democratical regimes within a resurgence of dark ages, superstitions, fanaticism, and intolerance. So both traditional and modernist cultures bring about newness. They differ substantially, as you can see in this picture. On one side, newness as shocking and provocative, disrespect for site and context, and on the other one, a building which, so it derives its inspiration from an imported and an updated and adapted tradition, sits well and beautifully in its new setting, where it both exalts the genius loci and the zeitgeist. After this short introduction to the main titles of my book, I hope to show how serendipity encompasses an openness and aspiration beyond rigid boundaries of ideology and theory and practice, and how it can become not only a metaphysical and poetical tool for both the romantic and rational architect, but also a necessary discipline for creative inspiration and cultural intelligence, and I would say for emotional intelligence, which is also a kind of love. Serendipity, as the Highnesses traveled, they were always making discoveries by accidents and sagacity of things which they were not in quest of. Serendipity invites us both for a flânerie or journey into territories of otherness and newness, and enhances the disposition to explore and discover by accident and sagacity a wide range of knowledge, experience, intuition into the way human habitat is best to address issues of building and dwelling, leading ultimately to the love, joy, and generosity we all need to make our world a better place, not only for a few, but for all. And some more thoughts on otherness, which I think is a really important concept. Mathieu Hénard writes in Compass that identity results from the confrontation or the encounter of the self with the other. And Lev Vygotsky says, through others, we become ourselves. Next, I will elaborate more on the topics of love, time and place geometry. And please note that I added place as I cannot conceive time without place, as much as I cannot conceive the human mind without the human body. Love is the basic drive of life and evolution, not competition and selfishness. It is the foundation of being part of a place and a community. It's what makes us strive for good government as well as beautiful architecture and cities. Time and place form an indissociable continuum of our world, of our imaginary consciousness, psyche, emotion, reason, and of our natural and built human habitat. They form the theater of permanence and change, or impermanence, if you like, the Buddhist culture, in both our existence and memory. Geometry is the perfect expression of both the material and spiritual construction of the universe. For some, the expression is divine love. Geometry articulates invisible principles of proportion, measure, and scale into the natural and built harmony of the world. Geometry is at the intersection of time and place. It reveals the universal patterns of order and chaos in the universe and outlines the tectonics of beauty in nature and human culture. It inspires love in the arts and sciences, and an architecture in this context is one which cherishes, protects, preserves, and cares for the built and natural environment. Natural meaning not only untouched nature, but man-made landscape, rural countryside, gardens, as Martin Heidegger beautifully reflects upon in Building, Thinking, and Dwelling. The old word bauen, which says that man is insofar as he dwells. This word bauen, however, also means at the same time to cherish and to protect, to preserve and care for, specifically to till the soil, to cultivate the vine. Traditional cities best illustrate and celebrate human solidarity, compassion, intelligence, feeling, community, as well as interconnectedness and interdependence between people and places. They express durable commitment to beauty, permanence, and the common good. They endeavor to inhabit this earth wisely, organically, beautifully, responsibly, and poetically. This is a traditional historic city, Viseu, in Portugal. And this is a new town in the Netherlands by Creer and Cole. It is not the age value, which makes a place memorable and enjoyable, but its capacity to foster durable qualities in dwelling and building, to strengthen sense of place, presentness, and community. Beauty is not an afterthought, an added ingredient, but an intrinsic expression of love, time, place, geometry in the compact, organic ecosystem of the traditional city. This image of an oasis in southern Morocco illustrates not cultural contradictions or anachronic realities, but evidence of the perpetual modernity of things past and present as they evoke and consecrate building and dwelling, encompassing the local and universal, the historic and the contemporary, permanence and change. And here below, I like to quote Hassan Fatih, who has been mentioned before, a fantastic quote. Now, if we are to reconcile with the architect's definition of contemporaneity, we must say that to be relevant to its time, to be contemporary, a work of architecture must fulfill these conditions. It must be part of the bustle and turmoil, the ebb and flow of everyday life. It must be related harmoniously to the rhythm of the universe, and it must be consonant with man's current stage of knowledge of change. Now, paradoxically, being of one's time and place means transcending the limitation of one's time and place by acknowledging and accepting the limitations of time and place. And you see the picture, Poundbury, 25% of social housing, beautiful. Now, I'd like to conclude with these two last pictures, which show beautiful new public spaces. On the left slide is Poundbury, master planned by Leon Crier, and on the right, Rosemary Square, West Palm Beach, and if I think it's designed, master planned by DPZ, Andres Twani and Elizabeth Pater-Zybek. And these pictures of contemporary public spaces showing the memorable places for a new conviviality, and conviviality meaning to live together in harmony and peace and love, I guess, and which celebrate so elegantly good manners in the way we dwell and build, and which we desperately have to learn again. Thank you so much.
Lucian, thank you very much. And I think you need to stop sharing.
Yeah. Okay, sorry. Post share. Okay, stop share. Okay, post share.
Top, I think.
Is that okay or no?
No, you have to stop sharing. I think it's at the top of the screen, I believe. There's a little box that says end share.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. It's done. Okay.
All right, so now we're back. So now we're going to go to Robert Adam. Robert, you have the floor.
Okay, let me just try and find
Earth as well here. So go ahead, please.
trying to find my talk, which is on here somewhere. For some reason, it's not on here somewhere. Hang on.
Okay.
Should be on there. Sorry, I have this problem with share my screen. Calendar reminders, no. Call for papers, no. How very odd. I tested this earlier, and it should be on here, but for some reason it's not.
Oh boy, we all go through this.
It's definitely on my screen when I look at it, but for some reason here it's not. No one can see that, I presume.
Not yet. No, if the producers are listening. Oh, here you go. Here we go.
No, that's not a lot of good. That's my check on what the times are. Right, that's my Spanish lessons. No. So I call for papers. No. Let's try again.
You have to open your presentation.
No. It's open. It's open. The problem is actually, is for some reason it's not sharing. There's always some bloody problem with these things.
Unshare the screen, and then when you share the screen, touch the presentation and share it again.
Okay.
All right.
I've now actually lost my place. Make it even worse. Stop share. Right, that's better. Let's try share screen again. There we are. Got it. Thank you very much. There's always some technical hitch.
Very good. Very good.
And one of the problems of coming last is that nobody else sticks to 10 minutes. And I'm so pleased to see so many people I know in the audience, like Fadru and Richard and Samir and Duru, Bertram Fisher, John Audun. So I wish I could be with you. So I'm going to try and be very brief and talk about this book, in which there is an awful lot of stuff. And I'm just going to give you a very quick race through. Well, there's no doubt about it that time is pretty important to all of us because we only have so much of it. In fact, everything in the universe has only got so much of it. And it's something which should preoccupy us, particularly when we get older, and also to preoccupy us when we're younger, because we're dying to get old, and when we're old, we're dying to get younger. But what we'd really like to do is we'd like to be out of it altogether. We'd like to live in this wonderful place called timelessness, which I don't think exists anywhere unless you resort to religion, which I don't. I just happen to choose Michael Graves and Toyo Ito. These are two architects whose work has been described by many people as timeless. Well, I leave you to reach your own judgments, but we all want timelessness because we're all stuck in time. And Steve's not going to like me much for this one. Of course, one of our ways we can, if without religion, one of the ways we have to go to it is to find other places, and then mathematics and geometry are some of them. And of course, the golden rectangle, which has remarkable characteristics, has been turned into something rather mystic. In what the Mona Lisa's nose has got to do with her right wrist, I'm not entirely sure. And if you take 3 paces forward in that picture of the Taj Mahal, you kind of lose it. I won't mention the one on the bottom left. And of course, the first time that the golden section was ever mentioned in any literature, specifically related to architecture, was in 1854 with Adolf Zeissing. So basically, we, in my opinion, we are locked in time, whether we like it or not. And of course, the problem with time is it's a huge subject. We can say the universe, according to current estimates, is 38 billion years old, plus or minus 21 million. Quantum seems to have no time, whereas entropy does. And now they're trying to rationalize them, but I will leave those, although I do discuss them in my book. I mean, we're into phenomenology, experiencing the thing itself, and here I'm having phenomenal time with the column. So that's really the book is about time, the experience of time. As most philosophers have dealt with this, recognize, and it's actually fairly obvious, that the present, the thing in which we live, actually doesn't exist at all. It's an infinitesimal moment between the past and the future. And what I said a few moments ago is in the past and can't be changed. You can reinterpret it. The future doesn't exist. The past has existed, and of course, and the way we deal with the past is to our memory. Our memory is not a videotape or a filing cabinet. A lot of neurological work demonstrates that when you remember something, you pull together a whole series of things, and every time you remember something, that memory adds to the memory of the thing you're trying to remember. So your memory is an assembly of various things from the past according to how they're relevant. But in order to do basic things like cross the road, you have to think about the future. We use the past in order to take ourselves into the future. Unfortunately, the only thing we know for sure about the future is we don't know what it is. And predictions of the future are notoriously inaccurate. I don't think Chicago did look like this in 1999. And thank goodness we didn't look like the picture on the bottom right in 1981, because in 1956, that's what we were supposed to look like. Notice the woman is still at the cooker and the man is reading the newspaper. But the thing about our obsession, of course, with the future, with modernity, if you like, is that, of course, it in itself is a passing phenomenon. There's kind of no point, really, because I used the diagram I used in my book here actually comes from analysis of science fiction. Everyone acknowledges that science fiction is really about the present. Is that you get new things, but new things very quickly become old things, instantaneously become old things. The past is really all we've got. But the thing about time is that time is the things change in time. In fact, the only way we know there is any time, because things change. If nothing changed, there wouldn't be any time. And I have no doubt that the mayfly has a rather different experience of time from the Galapagos tortoise, or for that matter, the mouse or the elephant. And at least for historians, have come up with this idea that actually the history itself moves at different rates, longue durée, courte durée, événement. This is a fact. It's obvious that if time has changed and things change at different paces, then time is not an absolute constant. We made it into a constant for scientific reasons. This is very important because, for example, in urban design, different bits of places last longer. They just do. And we need to understand that. MRG Conzen came up with the idea of town plan, building fabric, land and building utilization, or plan, building and function. Some things move slowly and some things move quickly. That's just the way it is. There's a lot more in this in my book and all of this, but this starts to, as a number of people have analyzed this. This is very important in any kind of urban design, or for that matter, architecture, or for that matter, sustainability. Is things that last longer matter most, and things that last longer are inherently sustainable. But we have to understand that some things last a long time and some things don't. So when you deal with urban design, the first thing you deal with is topography, geography, and landscape. These things last for millennia and so on. And you end up with furniture and equipment, which on the whole doesn't last very long. There's a lot more on this in the book, but this is a very important aspect of time. There's slow time and there is fast time. Well, we get on to another subject, which of course exercises us all, is modernity, is what actually is it? Everyone is, of course, obsessed with it. Look at the dates on these buildings, on the top, on the bottom, they're built round about the same time. So which ones are modern? Well, that all rather depends. That rather depends on what you think the word modern actually means. And in my book, I hone this down to 7 different meanings. Modern history, we can put that aside to some extent, but most of us live in what we call simple and ordinary modernity. I woke up this morning and I was in the 21st century and there wasn't a great deal I could do about it. So everything I did was a modern thing and everything I thought was a modern thought, and so on. But modernism is a historical theory that kind of uses a false analysis of history to say that you must always be new in order to be of your time. This is a false historical analysis, which I go into in some detail. But actually, the only way we deal with time in the end is as human beings, is memory. And we have personal memory, of course, which I've discussed, but we also have collective memory. We have the way we remember as a community. And Maurice Halbwachs had the principle that actually the way that we structure memory is made by our community. But one thing that our communities do is they try and fix our memory. So, for example, the Gloire de France is we try to fix that with the Arc de Triomphe, and the siege of Stalingrad, the enormous, look at the figures at the bottom, enormous Mother Russia, and bottom right is Eisenman's Holocaust Memorial. We have many memorials of Holocaust for very good reason. We don't want to forget it. We must not forget it. That's why we do it. So all of these things are about fixing memory as a community. And of course, understanding that buildings and architecture are actually one of our key aspects of our memory of our culture. Those who want to destroy cultures understand this very well, from Carthage to Hampi and here to Second World War bombing, or the Baedeker raids is where Britain bombed Germany, and Germany, instead, they're trying to destroy our culture, so Germany tried to destroy our culture. So that's and of course here with the Mostar Bridge in Yugoslavia, one of the more recent cases. If one in Yugoslav civil war, if a Croatian building had this is important Croatian monuments, the Serbs destroyed it. I think what Al-Qaeda and ISIS are doing is slightly different. This is a whole subject which merits more. They're actually using the importance of the things they're destroying in order to promote what they're doing, which is slightly different from destroying a culture. But anyway, I go into that, and you can read it in my book when you buy it, which of course you will. And then I finally get to the key point, which is the issue of tradition. Tradition permeates our lives, our families, our institutions, and we use in professional life, in political life, in family life, in cultural life. We actually draw on our traditions in very important moments in our lives. I'm going to finish off now with a few controversial issues about tradition. We're going to understand tradition. It permeates everything. Now, I'm going to pose now. I'm going to complete this with. There's a huge amount I've done on tradition from dealing with anthropology to primatology with apes and so on. There's lots of interesting stuff about tradition. But let's boil it down to 3 things. Ancestry. Now, the ancestry doesn't have to be real. It just has to be convincing. You can make up traditions. There's a very strong history of this, but you've got to be convincing. All of these things you're looking at have if you like, a fake tradition in them somewhere. I use the fake word quite carefully. So but they have to have an ancestry that's convincing. And of course, in traditional architecture, traditional design, that's what we do. We're not the only ones that do it, because this is the ancestry of a wider community. There's another community that do the same thing. These buildings on the left have both recently won awards, but of course their ancestry to the architecture profession is very recognizable to the buildings on the right, one of which is not actually a building, but I'm absolutely sure the people that designed these buildings knew them, which are 100 years old. So we can judge different traditions according to which community they address, understanding that traditions belong to communities. These traditions belong to an architectural community, the other traditions belong to a wider community. They have to have community identity. So this is the other principle of community identity. This Hindu temple is in the English Midlands, where there's a very large Hindu population. from Southern Asia. And this is very important. This is Duncan Stroik's building at the bottom, very clear drawing on identity from particular European sources, because religious communities identity, but all communities have this. This is just one aspect of it. Of course, one other community that has it is this one. If you want to win an architectural award, do the buildings on the top, because they'll look like the facsimile, note facsimile, of the building at the bottom. Every architect knows this. And if you want to win an architectural award, and at least 2 of these buildings have very recently, the architectural profession will recognize that you are part of their community, and they will, a community identity, and they will give you an award. And finally, it has to be identifiable. A well-known architect, a modernist architect once said to me, I do tradition too, but it's invisible. I said, well, it can't be a tradition if it's invisible. This doesn't work. So it's identifiable, and you often use decorative or symbolic things to identify it. So here, the left, building by Hugh Petter, and it has, it's a Prince of Wales building, and the capital is Prince of Wales Capitals. It's a cricket pavilion, and for aficionados of cricket, the things on the top are enormous versions of a thing in which the ashes are contained. So all the symbolism is there for you know it. So you can identify that. On the right is a building I did in Beirut, which I hope is still there. And that with a Beiruti architect, Fadal Odaga, and this has very specific Beiruti, Lebanese, or that particular part of the world symbolism tied up with it, which anyone in that area would recognize. And it's a particularly important corner in Beirut. So, of course, you can also be identifiable by identifying other forms of decoration. These are buildings with decoration on them. And of course, architects will recognize immediately that this decoration is this identifiable aspect of it. These are clearly buildings that belong to that particular community. So here we have tradition permeates everything we do. Don't forget it. The idea we haven't got it is nonsense. It permeates everything. But once you understand what tradition is, you can make useful comparisons, because communities, traditions belong to communities, and which communities do they belong to? Who recognizes them, and how do you make them? So that's the sort of end of my book, which I spent rather longer on because I think it's more relevant. But there's an awful lot more in the book, from innovation to the geography of modernity and so on and so on. But I all know you're all going to rush out and buy it. It's only $35 now, paperback, and read it and tell me what you think about it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you, Lucian, as well. And Robert, I hope we do get a chance someday to discuss ideas about time and things like proportion in the golden section. I think we'd find that our views are not actually as contradictory as they might appear to be on the surface. Anyway, thank you all very much, and that's the end of this session.